What's up, everybody? I'm Ben with Code Academy. I'm a developer from Chicago, and in this video, I'm going to be walking you through a project called Social Network for Pets. In this video, we're going to be working with the three major phases of a component's lifecycle, as well as the lifecycle methods that are associated with each one. These three major phases include mounting, updating, and unmounting. Alright, so let's take a closer look at the project description. In this project, we'll build a simple social network for pets. You'll be able to view a pet's profile, which contains their name, bio, and friends list, and navigate to other profiles. There'll be a profile directory where you can see all the profiles. And there are already three set up for us, so let's see what we have over here by default. Looks like we have the directory, we have three entries, dog, cat, and Komodo. And clicking on one, looks like it takes us to their profile, which we will be fleshing out in a little bit. And the only option as of right now is to click between this directory and the profiles. Diving into task group 1, looks like the first thing that we'll be working on is loading user data. So let's take a look at task 1. Run the app and take a look. Alright, we just did that. Pretty barren right now, only showing bare minimum and some placeholders. So the first thing we want to do is load some user data into it. And in order to do that, we are going to need a place to store it. So we're going to need to add some state. So let's create a constructor for this component. And we're going to set this .state to user data is going to equal null. Alright, so let's make our constructor method. Give it props. Call super props as always. And this .state, we're going to set user data and initialize it to null. So we've created our constructor method with our state. So we are now storing our data somewhere, and now we are ready to start loading it up. And it looks like we're going to be creating this new method called load user data. It's going to do a couple things. So underneath constructor, let's start writing our load user data method. And it's going to do two things. It's going to set the user data state to null while it's loading. So this .set state user data null, just like we have up here. And the second thing it's going to do is fetch the user data with this method called fetch user data. You can call the function like this. This.fetchID, fetch user data, .props username. Alright, so let's copy and paste this. Just paste this underneath where we wrote this.set state. Note, it simulates a real user data or some real user data, but because this is a learning exercise, it doesn't actually do that. Okay, so we don't need to look too much at this right now, but what we do need to know is that we are setting our user data state to null while it's loading, and we are fetching this data in this load user data method for now. Now that we have this method to load the user data, let's add another lifecycle method that is going to call this function when our component is mounted. So a good place to do that is going to be in our component didMount lifecycle method. And inside of here, all we're going to do is type this.load user data. Alright, now that we are loading our user data, let's change a couple things so that we can display it. Let's go down to our render method. Right now, if you take a look at this isLoading variable, we have it to always be true, but we're going to change that such that when user data is null, we want it to be true, but when it is not null, when we actually have some stuff, we're going to change this to false. So let's use a ternary operator, and we're going to write this.state user data, and when this is equal to null, then isLoading is going to be true, or else we're going to set it to false. So when we run this code, we're not going to see anything displayed quite yet because we still have some placeholders down here. but we should see this change a little bit. All right, so it looks a little bit different. This is no longer gray, it's now black, and instead of having a grayed out box here, we now have this bio placeholder. Since we've now let our app know that it is not always loading data, but it is in fact receiving it at some point, let's continue on to display this data. So let's start by displaying the user's name. Alright, inside of this render method, we're going to create a new variable called name. And if isLoading is true, then we're going to set name to some sort of default. And if it is not true, then we actually have some name value, so we're just going to display this.state.user.data.name. So we can use another ternary operator here. Const name equals and isLoading. If that's true, then we're just going to use this default value, letting us know that it's still loading, or else we are going to grab its value. And we're going to go down here into where we are returning our JSX, and we're going to get rid of this placeholder, and we are going to have our name variable. Alright, and if we load this back up, we now see that we have names being displayed in our profile. Moving on, we're going to do the same exact thing that we just did with name, but we are now going to do that with the user's bio. So, underneath name, let's create another variable called bio. We're going to do another ternary operator, isLoading, and if it is, we're going to give it some default value. So here, let's see what we got down here. Let's use this as a placeholder, and we'll toss it up here instead. And if we do have some data, then we're going to grab it off the state. And finally, down here, we can now get rid of this and replace it with this bio variable that we just created. And we should see something load up here now. Alright, perfect. Instead of this placeholder, we now actually have some value that we are grabbing. Alright, once again, we're going to do the same thing, but this time with the user's friend list. Let's make another variable, friends, and this time, when it is loading, we're going to have this be set to an empty array. So, isLoading, that's true, we're going to have this, or else we are going to grab this.friends off of our state. Now let's update the usernames prop of the user list component with our new friends constant. Let's save this. And if we click on cat now, we can see the list of the cat's friends' usernames. And same with these other guys. Alright, so the final thing we need to display is the user's profile picture. So let's find the div with the class name of profile picture right down here. It's currently empty, but if isLoading is false, so if we have some data, we're going to want to display this image. And we can do that the same way that we did these guys up here, or we can use this inline AND operator right inside of this JSX. So let's try that out. So we're going to need some braces because we're nesting JavaScript. And we're going to ask isLoading equal to true. Actually, we're going to type this as false because we're using this AND operator. So if it's no longer loading, Then we're going to use the AND operator, and we're going to toss this image in there. So let's just copy and paste this code right underneath this. Get rid of this extra line. So if isLoading is false, then we're going to display this picture. So let's save this guy and check out one of these animals' profiles and see if we have a picture. All right, cool. Got this adorable dog, this little sleeping cat, and this regal-looking Komodo. All right, so we have everything we need showing up in our profiles now. So what we're going to do in these last two tasks is just focus on some cleanup. And we have two things that we're going to address. In this task, we're going to focus on this first one. So let's read this. If you open a profile, then quickly return to the directory, then go to a different pet's profile, there will be some jitter. All right, so what is this jitter that this is referring to? Well, if we're at the directory and we open up a profile, what that's doing is mounting this profile component. So this component did mount function is going to run. That's going to call this.loadUserData, which in turn is going to fetch the user data for this specific profile. So that's not a ton that we're fetching right now because our profiles are pretty simple. But what if we had a larger scale application and we had a lot more to grab and we just kept clicking through different profiles? Well, as more and more components mounted, then more and more calls to load user data are going to be made, and we're going to be fetching all this different user data. And all of these are going to have to finish running to completion in the background. So that could lead to performance issues. Instead, what we can do, though, is when we open up a profile, if we're going to click away from it, then even if this fetch user data function has not finished yet, we can cancel it. And how we do that is when we unmount the component, we're going to run cancel fetch. So let's do that. So now, even as we click through these profiles, we are not going to have to wait for all of those different calls to finish up. Okay, we're on to our final task. So we are still patching up this problem. If we click on a pet's friend, the only thing that changes is this username. Let's test that out, dog. Yep, the only thing that changes is this username. So let's add a lifecycle method for when the component updates now. We added our will unmount, and we cancel this fetch, but now we are going to add a component did update method. And we're actually going to pass it pre-props. And if the username has changed, in other words, if this.props.username is not equal to the previous props username, then we're going to do a couple things. So if this.props.username is not equal to the previous props username, then we're going to cancel the fetch. So same thing as we did right here. Let's just copy paste that. And finally, we are going to load the user data once more. All right, so let's save this up. And now that that is done, let's go to dog, we'll click on Komodo, and we are now loading a whole new profile. In this video, we worked with the profile component as an example of how to apply the various lifecycle methods during the three major phases of a component's lifecycle. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.